Morning folks, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters on the Pathfinder School. Welcome back to our series Materia, Medica. I think this is our 16th installment of these videos. And today we're going to talk about the plant that causes more people problems in the summer months than probably any other plant, and that is ragweed. And don't mistake that with the goldenrod. Lots of people think that Canadian goldenrod or some other type of goldenrod throughout the U.S., which we've showed in an earlier installment in this series, is responsible for the allergic reaction that people get called hay fever. When in all actuality, it is the ragweed that causes that to happen. So we're going to talk about the ragweed today a little bit, and there is a common ragweed and there's a giant ragweed. And while they're both in the same family, they look completely different. We're going to look at both of them today. We're going to talk about a theory called like versus like. And we're also going to talk about some common, easy uses for this plant because it is a very, very strong astringent plant. Stay with me. Okay, so here is a common ragweed plant that's kind of separated out by itself here away from all of the others. And it has small buds coming up where it's about to bloom here. It has a brownish red colored stem on the top that's greenish on the bottom, and it's green and brown and hairy along its length. The leaves of this plant are somewhat fern-like. If I had to try to describe them, I'll try to get you a really close-up look at the leaf of this plant here in just a second. But you don't want to confuse this with something like poison hemlock, so be careful of that. Okay, that's about as close up as I can get for you to the plant itself and give you a look at the flower buds, the leaves, and the color of the stem and things like that. So I hope that helps you out. Now this is the common ragweed, and we're also going to look at giant ragweed in just a second. Okay, now one thing I'll say in this series of videos is, again, we're talking about uses for these plants in an emergency scenario on the fly. So we're not talking about, can I dry the herb and use it later? Can I make a tincture and use it later? Can I make some kind of an oil and use it later? Yes, you can do most of those things with most of these herbs, but that's not what we're concentrating on in this series. We're concentrating on what can I do with it on the fly immediately. And that brings us to the theory of like versus like. Okay, so here's a good photograph, basically, or a still shot of that plant mixed in with other plants. So now you have to understand how to correctly identify this plant, because it's going to be smaller than some of the surrounding plants, and it's going to be intermixed. And some of those plants may not be good for you, and they definitely would not have the same uses as this plant. So understanding how to identify these plants on the fly is important as well. Okay, Hippocrates lived from 460 to 377 BC. And one of the things that he said in his writings was that by similar things a disease is produced, and through the application of the like is cured. And what he meant by that was the theory of like versus like. And that is applicable somewhat to the ragweed. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay, so let's look at applying the theory of like versus like with the ragweed, because Matthew Wood speaks to this in his book, The Earthwise Herbal. And if we have an attack of hay fever while we're out and we don't have our meds that we take normally because we know we have hay fever issues, we can use this plant, which causes hay fever, to counteract the symptoms of hay fever. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take what Matthew Wood calls a nip of the leaf. Now you can make decoctions, you can make tinctures and things like that to use at home, but on the fly you're going to have to use the nip of the plant method. I used this plant yesterday and put it into my mouth because once I know something's not poisonous and I've identified it properly, I want to see what that plant tastes like in my mouth and what it does to the inside of my mouth, because that will help me discern better what this plant does. And I will tell you, I don't have hay fever, so I don't have that problem. But the one thing that this plant does do in my mouth is it is immediately and probably third degree astringent. It gave me cotton mouth for almost an hour yesterday. So with the nip of the plant theory of hay fever, if I were having symptoms of hay fever, I would eat a small portion of the leaf of this plant and I would swallow it. Then I would see what it did to my body. And it's a little bit acrid tasting when you swallow it. It's got a little bit of a bite to it. But I would want to sit down and see what it does to my body. If the symptoms start to go away and I start to feel better because of it, then I might take a little bit more. But I'm not going to overdo it until I see what it's going to do over the course of several hours. But this method of using medicines in the wild, the like versus like theory, especially applies to the ragweed and has been tested by people like Matthew Wood to be not only effective for hay fever, but also for pet dander allergies and things of that nature, mold allergies, fungus allergies, those types of things that react with your mucous membrane system have been found to be counteracted by either a tincture of this plant or nibbling the leaves of this plant. Okay, so because we've already figured out that this plant is highly astringent, and my mouth is dry right now just chewing up that one half of a leaf, we know that this plant's going to be very styptic in nature, and we can use it to stop surface bleeding. So that's a very good on-the-fly use for this plant, as long as we can identify it. Even if we don't have allergies, it's probably an astringent to the 3rd degree, so that tells me that it's going to be one of the best plants I can find to stop bleeding like that. If I scratch my face or something like that, or poke a thorn in my hand, somewhere that bleeds a lot because you have a lot of capillaries close to the surface, a styptic plant like this that's highly astringent will help to stop that bleeding. And that's important to realize as well. Okay, so right back here, tucked in behind several other plants, is giant ragweed. All right, and you can see it's got a hairy stem. It's got a long top on it where it's going to flower. The real easy identifying factor with this thing, to me, is this big triple leaf right here for giant ragweed. Okay, it gets really tall. The stalk's hairy all the way down, solid green. This one's probably 6 feet tall. But the best identifying factor to me is this 3-leaf deal right here, because there's no other plant that looks like that that's a herb or a weed and not a tree. You know, you have a similar leaf to this on basically a sassafras, and you may be able to confuse this with tulip poplar. But as far as a weeded plant goes, you're not going to confuse this with anything else if you see this large leaf. And it has the same properties exactly as the common ragweed. All right, folks, well, I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School. I appreciate you joining me for this quick video today on common ragweed and giant ragweed. I would urge you to do your research, do your dirt time, and understand these plants before you just haphazardly use them on yourself or recommend them to someone else. I appreciate your views. I appreciate your support. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, for our business, for all of our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends, and I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.